Resuming debate, reprise de débat. The honourable member for Saanich Gulf
Thank you, Madam Speaker. C'est un grand honneur pour moi de prendre la parole ce matin au sujet de ce projet de loi C.
Today I rise to speak to Bill C-33. I would like to start by thanking my colleague for Richmond Arthabaska. I'd like to thank him for supporting my amendments this morning.
Pleased to finally be standing at third reading on this bill. Bill C-33's history, I'll recount it briefly, but it hasn't been brief. This bill first came forward for first reading in November 2022, so we're coming up on 2 years. We have to get this bill passed and through the Senate before whenever an election occurs. Let me go through the history here. When it was first brought, I want to thank the previous Minister of Transportation who did the heavy lifting on this, and that's the Member of Parliament for Mississauga Centre. Then in summer of 2023, it shifted to being the member for Honoré-Mercier, and I think it was yesterday, or it shifted to being the honourable member for Oakville. This is critical legislation. It deals with rail safety and issues relating to our ports. There are many, many sections to this, and obviously, given that it deals with such substantially different issues, les enjeux dans ce projet de loi.
There are issues in this bill. We need to prioritize rail safety and marine safety. The issue this poses in my writing, I will tell you about.
And I want to specifically, of course, address my own amendment. But before getting to that, I really do want to salute the work of members on all sides of this place, particularly contributions from New Democratic members of committee and from the Bloc Québécois in major improvements in this bill, following support from some Liberals on the committee, Green Party amendments at committee, to improve the legislation. For instance, some of my amendments that were accepted make it a part of the fundamental purpose of the Marine Act to also respect the environment and Indigenous rights. These are important elements because the system that's used out of the ports along the BC coast significantly impact Indigenous rights and significantly impact the environment, but have never been recognized before. Some of the things that are done here, which are terribly important, is to try to improve the efficiency of ports along the BC coast. It's not extra paperwork, it's not extra regulation. It's trying to make sure that our ports operate efficiently in the interests of everything from prairie grain farmers to First Nations, Indigenous peoples, Coast Salish peoples up and down the BC, particularly on southern Vancouver Island, who are negatively impacted by the failure of the Port of Vancouver Fraser Port Authority from ever consulting First Nations about the appropriation of their lands, their territories, but particularly their traditional rights in the waters of the Salish Sea, completely ignored for a very long time. So when we look at the legislation, initially at first reading back in November 2022, I was pleased to see it and excited to see it and glad we finally had some improved legislation. I will say one of the things that I'm encouraged about, which came forward with the legislation and with some amendments, that the Minister of Transport will now, if the Minister, he or she has reasonable grounds to believe that a vessel is a threat or poses a direct or indirect risk to the security of marine transportation, or to the health of persons involved, the Minister may direct the vessel to proceed to a different place. Now, why does this matter so much? So for members who are not coastal and who haven't heard this really quite horrific situation, because of the inefficiencies, particularly in shipping goods in bulk, containers basically have computerized systems and barcodes along the side. They come into the port authority, whether it's a port up and down the coast, whether it's Prince Rupert or Vancouver. The containers are read quickly and moved to the right place. They tend to be shipped out quickly. The difficulty comes with shipping of goods in bulk, primarily coal, metallurgical and thermal, and different categories of grain, whether barley or durum, the wheat and the barley that shows up at ports doesn't get shipped efficiently, and then it has to be loaded into freighters that have several different holds. They can have 3 or 4 different holds, Madam Speaker. So what happens is, because it seems that every year, and I'm sure prairie farmers, if they're watching today, will know that this is the case, CN and CP Rail seem to be surprised every year by something called fall and grain harvest. And they don't have the cars lined up to ship that grain efficiently to ports where it's going to go to other countries to make, the farmers can recoup their costs and other countries can buy our grain. So what happens is you get one hold of a freighter loaded. The Port of Vancouver then says, okay, there's no room for you in this port. Just go sit up there. Sit near Galliano Island for a while. Go sit near Pender Island. Go sit near Gabriel. That's fine. Just sit there and cool your jets. You get free parking there. No benefit to the local community at all. You just drop your anchor. Destroy the benthic organisms below. Make a lot of noise and contribute to the threatened status of the southern resident killer whales. So there are a number of things that this bill does which are improvements. One is to allow the Minister of Transportation to redirect where those ships are sitting. And I put to my friends on the Conservative side of the House, think about this. You want accountability? Why is it that our harbor authorities are so unaccountable, don't talk to local communities, don't have to care about it? They are a law unto themselves. This bill begins to represent the concerns of Indigenous peoples and communities up and down our coast. Now, the amendment, and I really want to get to my amendment before I run out of time, is to do something that was promised by the Liberal Party in the 2021 election campaign, which is to ban the export of thermal coal. Now, thermal coal, unlike metallurgical coal, is being shipped to other countries for the purpose of burning it to release greenhouse gases for electricity. But more galling than the export of thermal coal is that the thermal coal being shipped out of the Port of Vancouver is coming from the United States. It comes up on rail cars. It contributes to coal dust through communities like Tsawwassen. It contributes to immediate health negative impacts. And why is it coming up from the U.S.? Because the United States, up and down the West Coast, has banned the export of thermal coal for climate reasons. So U.S. coal is being shipped up to Canada to be moved to our ports to slow down the efficiency of the ports because it's a bulk export, same problem, getting it into different holds of different vessels to ship to another country where the United States and the states up and down their West Coast won't do this anymore. So we have the burden of a climate impact that's negative, of a negative impact on the survival of our southern resident killer whales, and affront to Indigenous rights, and all of this contributing to the inefficiency of the Port of Vancouver. So we have an amendment in this bill that did get through a committee at clause by clause, but it won't take effect until the year 2030. So my amendment tries to align the interests of existing and previous government promises in all these areas: climate action, protection of endangered species, respect of Indigenous rights, and in one fell swoop, this amendment would bring the banning of thermal coal up to 2025 instead of being postponed to 2030, and the current language is quite permissive in that regard. Again, there are more aspects of Bill C-33 than I can cover in a short speech at this moment of finally getting to report stage. But I want to ask all members here to consider how important it is to get this bill finally, considering that clause by clause took place in December of 2023. Here we are in September of 2024. Let's get these amendments passed. I urge colleagues, I'd be very grateful for support for the amendments that I'm bringing forward today on behalf of the Green Party to accelerate the banning of thermal coal from Canada. Metallurgical coal would still be going through our ports, but the specific coal that, as I said, the U.S. states have already taken action for climate reasons alone, that they won't ship it. So let's make sure Canada stops shipping thermal coal overseas and at the same time take significant action to reduce the amount of noise which is driving our southern resident killer whales to extinction. At the same time, respect Indigenous rights. I thank the Wasatch Leadership Council for their work on this issue. I thank the citizen groups up and down the Southern Vancouver Island who track these freighters, and I urge all colleagues to expeditiously see the passage of key amendments for the environment and the approval of Bill C-33 at third reading, and report stage first and then third reading. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, the Minister of Transport.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the member for her comments. Myself and the member do share something that's very near and dear to both our hearts, and that is a jurisdiction that we represent that is very strategic in Canada's overall supply chains, trade corridors, the Asia-Pacific, in my neck of the woods, the Niagara Ports Trade Corridor along the St. Lawrence Seaway. So with that, Madam Chair, my question to the member is that how do you see this bill, Bill C-33, contributing overall to the Canadian economy with respect to the supply chains that are identified, the capacity needed within those supply chains, and with that creating fluidity primarily in both our areas that are very strategic, but as well giving the country a better and more strengthened economy?
The Honourable Member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
I thank my honourable colleague for the question, and he's right. We have exchanged, I would say, conversations that border on rants about how it feels to be in a community where a harbour authority really seems to lack accountability or care and concern, which affects the economy as well as communities. If, as a modern industrialized country with a significant value to our economy from exports, our harbours have to be more efficient. They have to operate with accountability to their stakeholder groups that surround them that include, as I said, people who want to ship goods. Prairie farmers in particular have been up in arms, and I've met with many of them about how inefficient it is and how unprepared every single year CN Rail and Canadian Pacific. By the way, the full name for Canadian Pacific recently has become Canadian Pacific and Kansas City Rail. CN Rail's biggest shareholder is Bill Gates. I'm wondering how much these shippers of our key parts of our supply chains are really devoted to Canada, since they're owned and privatized elsewhere. But I would say that this bill will contribute to economic improvements by making our ports more efficient.
Questions and comments? The Honourable for Langley-Aldergrove.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Saanich Gulf Islands for her talk on transportation, particularly the Port of Vancouver. She talked about supply chain disruptions in shipping grain from the prairies to the port and off to overseas. And one of those disruptions is the inability of the Port of Vancouver to load grain on rainy days, which we have quite a few of in Vancouver. And I wonder if, of all the supply chain problems, that seems like one that is looking for a solution. I wonder if the honourable member has a comment about that.
Honourable Member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
And thank you, my friend from Langley-Aldergrove. Obviously, he knows wherever he speaks. There are quite a lot of impediments to the efficient loading of grain, even when you get the grain to port, when there's actually a freighter there with holds ready to take it away. I do support the Longshoremen's Union. I know they've negotiated in their collective agreements a number of restrictions on the way in which, for safety reasons, grain is loaded when it rains. But I have to say, I think there's better solutions than the current state of affairs. We should be able to load grain efficiently, even when it rains. Not a rare event at the Port of Vancouver. So I sympathize with his question, and I don't think I have time to comment further, but thank you.
Questions et commentaires. Une brève question.
A brief question. The honourable member for, pardon me, Pierre Boucher, Les Patriotes Verchères. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I will ask a quick question. I commend my Green Party colleague on her speech, which was fascinating. And it's very clear that she knows the file very well, even though she's not on the Transport Committee, so hats off to her. So the amendment to stop exporting coal as of 2025, to what extent does she feel that that's important? And how important would it be for the Liberals to not cave to Conservative and NDP pressure, as usual?
Islands.
Je veux dire un grand merci.
A huge thank you to my honourable colleague, the member for Pierre Boucher, Les Patriotes Verchères. He is one of the opposition MPs who who really worked hard to improve this bill in order to protect the environment. It is absolutely essential to take action before 2030. We need to stop exporting coal. We need to stop exporting coal from our ports. It causes delays for other products and goods being exported as well. So we need to take action immediately, and I thank my dear colleague.
Debate, reprise de débat, the honourable member South Okanagan West Kootenay, and will have to